Well, it's good to be with you guys. Thanks. This is quite possibly the largest table I've ever preached from. But it is great to be with you guys. Let me pray, and then we'll dive in. So, Father, I thank you for your grace. I thank you that you are a good Father, and I know today many of us struggle with that image, as many of us just struggle with the image of Father, and that there could be a good Father who loves us. And so I pray today that as we talk about how to have breathing room in your life, as we talk about how to let go of things, to live at a sustainable pace, I pray, Holy Spirit, that you would speak through these words in Psalm and in Matthew, that you inspired to be written these words that are true, that are authoritative for our lives. In your name, amen. Well, as Ty said, I have 5 kids. We have a daughter and then 4 boys, so our house is always on the verge of UFC, it seems like. And so whenever my wife and I get the opportunity to go out on a date night, we are incredibly excited because we love the idea of just being able to spend time without our kids and just get out together. But my wife is one of those. She would say she's frugal, but I would say that it's kind of like a level below that of cheap. Maybe you can relate to that. And so whenever we go on a date night, I have to really plan it out. I can't just, go and blow the bank on it. And so for her, all of the time that we've been married, for her, it is just a waste of money to spend a date night going to the movie theater. Because in her mind, when we go to a movie theater, we are paying somebody to watch our kids, and then we're just sitting there and we're not talking, we're not really spending time together in the way that women would say you spend time together, of face-to-face and having a conversation. But for me, so growing up, whenever I was in elementary school or junior high and they would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? The only thing I wanted to do was to be a movie critic, because I just could not think of a better job of getting paid to watch movies and then talk about it. And so anytime we get to go to a movie, I am just so excited. I always have this laundry list of movies that I want to see. And so on this night, it was about 4.5 years ago, my wife Katie said, okay, let's go see a movie tonight. You can pick. I know that you always want to go see a movie. And I'm like, yes. So we're driving there, and I am giving her all the options, and so I am running through, this is what Rotten Tomatoes says about this movie, this is the rating on this movie, and her response was, Josh, I just don't care. Whatever movie you want to see, I don't care. And it wasn't because she was, she actually just didn't care. She just said, you know what I like, you just pick a movie. So I'm going back and forth about this. And I cannot decide for the life of me what movie we should go see. And so we get to the movie theater and we're standing in line. And for whatever reason, in this moment when I was completely indecisive, the line we were in moved as fast as possible. Like, we got up to the counter in record time. And I'm standing there going, what? Where's all the people that, so I'm so indecisive about it. I'm standing there and I'm looking, and 2 of the movies that we had talked about were starting 5 minutes apart. And so we get there, and I'm standing there, and of course, as soon as I'm standing there indecisive, about 15, 25 people show up behind me, and they're all waiting. And so finally, I just say the title, and we get the tickets. Well, as soon as I hand the tickets to the guy, I'm having buyer's remorse about it. I'm just thinking, man, why did we buy this? Why did we go to this one? So we get our popcorn and Sour Patch Kids, because we're highly addicted to Sour Patch Kids. And so we're sitting down there, and we're watching the previews, because if you're into movies, if you miss the previews, you just need to wait till the next showing. You can't, there's just no reason to go. Anyway, so we're sitting there watching the previews, and I lean over to Katie and I said, hey, what if we went to the other movie? What if we just changed theaters? It was right next door, and she said, I don't care. So we pick up our popcorn and Sour Patch Kids, and we go to the theater next door. We're watching the previews, which thankfully they had different ones, so it was super exciting. I got multiple previews that day. And so we're sitting there, and I say, hey, what if we went back? She was really gracious. She says, hey, whatever you want. We switched 5 times. Okay? 5 times. Every time she was real nice about it. And finally, the reason that we picked the movie that we watched was because it just started. So we were kind of stuck. So about 30 minutes into the movie, because I can hear the movie in the other theater, I lean over and I said, why did we pick this movie? And she looks at me and says, well, we're not switching now. And so we get in the car, and I mean, I am fuming then for the next 2 hours. I'm just sitting there going, why? We wasted all this money. My wife is right. We should never go see a movie on date night. Like, this is wasting money. And so we get in the car, and she says, what is going on? What is happening to you? So, because this is not like you, because I'm a very structured, detailed, just decisive person. And she says, this is not like you at all. And I started to realize in that moment 4.5 years ago what we in our church have called breathing room. And breathing room is this place between your current pace and your limits. And breathing room has to do not just with your schedule and how you spend your time, but how you spend your money. And what I started to realize over the last 4 or 5 years is that most people have very little margin or breathing room in their life. They end up signing up for teams and committees that they don't want to be on. They end up being on sports teams with their kids that they think, we don't have time for this. We're doing all these different things. People are just maxed when it comes to their money. They're maxed when it comes to how they eat. They're maxed when it comes to how they work. But yet what happens, though, is we have no idea how to stop it. And so I was telling a friend of mine, and he was asking me about my book. And so I told him about it, and I said, well, it's like this. And he said, well, let me tell you about my day recently. And maybe you can relate to this. He says, Josh, I wake up at 6 a.m. and we have 3 kids. And so it is just a mad rush to get out the door and get everybody fed and get them to school and get everybody to work. And he said, my wife works. And so, it is like every man for himself in the morning. And so you're rushing out the door and you're eating something in the car and you get to work and you try to catch your breath, but you immediately get started. And your day is just one thing after the other. It is one email, one text, one notification after the other. And he says, when my wife drops our kids off at school, then she spends the rest of the day running errands and going to meetings and just trying to get through the to-do list. And he says, for lunch, he said, lunch, most of the time I totally forget about packing a lunch. So he said, I end up, eating something I shouldn't, drinking a ton of soda, or I skip lunch altogether. And he said, but then I hit the dreaded 2 p.m. moment. And he said, in that moment, he said, I'm exhausted. And he said, all I'm thinking about is how do I get to 5 o'clock? How do I get to 6 o'clock? How do I get to the end of my day? And he said, but then, because both me and my wife work, he said, our kids stay after school. Someone has to go pick them up. And it's always this argument about who's going to pick them up and who's the least tired and who did it last time. And we're keeping this chart a lot of times about how often I've picked them up and how often she's picked them up. And he said, but then, this is where the real fun starts. He said, because they're on 3 different baseball teams. And so he said, we run to one field, and then we go to this other field. And he said, finally, when I'm sitting there at about 7:30 watching a baseball game, it's my first moment of silence. And I said, well, what do you do? What do you do in that moment? And he said, I pull up my email, and I start working. His wife was sitting there. I said, well, what do you do? And she says, I just pull up Facebook and see what I missed and see what's happening. And he said, I figure, it's my first time to finally catch up on something. And he said, the amazing thing about email is he says, everything that you work on in one day, he said, you can get an email that totally cancels out everything that you did. He said, I can go sit in a meeting that a decision is made and get back and find out that I had an email that made that meeting irrelevant. He said, finally then, on this day, he said, we got home from baseball. He said, I beat my wife home, and we're looking in the fridge, and of course there's no food. And he said, I wonder if anybody shops in this family. And his wife said, well, you could shop. And he said, finally, we get takeout. My son's playing Xbox. Of course, he's not hungry at 8:30. But he said at 8:30, my son said, hey, I have a project that's due tomorrow that I haven't started yet, and no one knew about it. And he said, I flew through the roof because in that moment, I knew my night was wrecked. Everything that I had planned on doing. And I said, well, what were you going to do? He said, I was just going to fall asleep on the couch. He said, finally, I get into bed at 11 o'clock. And I'm watching TV. And he said, the thought runs through my mind. He said, is this really what I work so hard for? Is this the life that I work so hard to provide? He said, I look over at my wife, and, she's already asleep. And he said, I want to ask her about her day, and I want to connect with her, but we don't really do that anymore. He said, we're just too tired. He said, there was a time where we used to talk, and we used to connect spiritually and emotionally and relationally and physically, but now we just don't. He said, when I looked over at my clock, these big red letters that said 12:15, he said, I knew I was going to have to take a sleeping pill just to be able to go to sleep. And I was going to wake up and do it all over again. And what struck me in that conversation was, for most of us, that's the life we work so hard for. Now, no one in their 20s ever says, the life that I'm going for is one that's really fast-paced, one that will never slow down, one that I don't really know my spouse or my kids or my friends. And I said to him, I said, when was the last time you hung out with people? And he said, honestly, I don't really have any friends. And you know what the sad thing is for most men, statistically? By the time they're 50, they don't have any close friends. And I realized something, that most of us live without breathing room. Most of us live an unsustainable pace. Now, here's a couple of things just for you to think about when it comes to breathing room and where you are on this spectrum. The first one is, here's how you know you're without breathing room. That what is normally easy is now incredibly difficult for you. So if you're an incredibly organized person, for you it now all of a sudden becomes just this arduous task to organize anything. For me, I'm very decisive, and so the moments that I start to waver on a decision, it could be as simple as what to eat for lunch, where I just stand in the kitchen and I just look at the fridge and I think, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. And so when things that are normally easy become difficult, sleep is hard to come by. The ironic thing is that the more tired you are, the more run down you are, the harder it is to fall asleep. Because you lay in bed and you have so many things running through your mind, you have so many to-do lists that you need to get done, you have so many things that you're running to from one thing to the next, you just don't have any margin, any space for it. And so sleep is hard to come by. Another one is that it's hard to get going in the morning. Maybe you might be a morning person. I'm not. I married a morning person, and so that's just God's, humor in bringing us together. But when you lack breathing room, it's hard to get going in the morning. It's hard to motivate yourself to get out of bed in the morning. Another one is you get angry fast. You have a short fuse that goes like this. Now think about this. The last time you got angry, here's a great test for you. Did your reaction match the situation? So I had a conversation with a friend recently, and he is going through a really hard time, and he got incredibly upset about something. And I said, hey man, your reaction right now is not matching this situation at all. You are flipping out about something that tomorrow is not going to matter. And so you get angry incredibly fast. You have impulses to eat or drink, or you struggle to control them. Here's a good way to think about it. Anytime you think, if I could just have blank, then I'll feel better. If I could just have that ice cream tonight, I'll feel better. Right? Did you ever notice we call it comfort food? Right? If I could just have this, I just need a drink to just take the edge off, and then I can relax. Or like my friend, I just need a sleeping pill to be able to calm down, to just be able to stop. Did you know that 2 out of every 3 American adults takes a sleeping pill at least 4 times a week? Just to be able to sleep. Just to be able to sleep. We are one of the most tired generations to have ever lived. One of the most tired generations. Another one is you start to think short-term instead of long-term, because when you don't have breathing room, you can't think about next month or next year. You can only think about the next hour, the next day. You can't think ahead. You can't plan ahead. You're just stuck where you're at. And the last one, you don't laugh and have fun. You don't have any fun. When was the last time you sat around a table with a group of people and you just howled laughing? And here's what happens when that happens. Do you know what we do? Afterwards, we go, man, we should do this again. In 7.5 months. Right? If you're a note taker, here's something you can write down. This truth has just changed our family and our church. It's up on the screens. Every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. That every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. And this applies to everything. This is positive and negative. Right? If you say yes to getting up at 5 a.m. to exercise, you're saying no to more sleep, but you're saying yes to a healthy lifestyle. If you say yes to that extra dessert, you're saying no to a healthy lifestyle. Every time you sign up for a team, for a committee, every time you say you sign up your kids for that sports team, you're saying no to certain things. So every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. If you have a Bible, you can open it to Psalm 46, or you can pull it up on your Bible apps. They read it at the start of the sermon. And I want to just unpack this incredibly helpful but but well-known passage in the book of Psalm. And David is writing this psalm, and he's talking about who God is, because one of the problems when we begin to lack margin or breathing room is that we stop to see God for who he is, and we also start to elevate the picture of ourselves and what we think we can do. And so this is what David says in Psalm 46, verse 1. He says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. And so there's a couple of reasons that I think we begin to lack breathing room. We begin to lack margin, and a lot of times find ourselves burning out. And there's two simple reasons. The first one is this, is that we start to try to be God. We try to be God in our lives. Look at what David says. He says, God is our refuge and our strength. Now, in your life, is there an area, is there a relationship where you're trying to be a refuge and strength to the people around you? Where David goes on and says, God is our refuge. He is a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved in the heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. We try to be God. We say yes to more than we can handle. We try to rescue people. Maybe you have a relationship with somebody right now. It might be a child, a sibling, a friend, a spouse, where you think, if I can just get them to do this, then things will change. And so we try to rescue them. We try to change them. And we take on this pressure that we're not meant to carry. We try to be this refuge to people. Most people in our culture, we struggle to disconnect from electronics. In fact, now what scientists are finding is that if you take your phone and you don't put it in your pocket and you just set it down, do you know what will happen? You'll have phantom texts. This is a real medical term. So people spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to come up with phantom text. But you will feel it. And you'll think, oh, my phone, and you'll feel the vibration on your leg. You'll have that. We jump. Katie was talking with a group of wives a couple of weeks ago, and the one said, anytime we sit down at dinner, I just get frustrated because it's like one of the only times each week that we have a family dinner with all of our kids and we're all there, but anytime our phone beeps, one of us picks it up. Well, who texted us? Who liked my Instagram photo? Who emailed me? And she said, so my husband and I, we spend most of dinner not connecting with each other or with our kids, and we're checking our phones all the time. And part of that is because we think we're God, and the people who are texting us need us. The people who are emailing us need us. If I don't jump to answer that phone call, what's going to happen to them? What's going to happen to them? And Katie looked at him and said, well, why do you think you and your husband do that? And this woman said, because those people need us. And Katie said, no, the people who are sitting around that table are the people who need you. Those are the people who need you. Now, here's what happens the moment you put your phone away or put it in a basket like we do at night, is you begin to go through addictive withdrawals. Don't believe me? Just think for a moment right now how you would feel if you did not have your phone but left it at home or in the car in this moment. All right? So we try to be God. Look at verse 10 in Psalm 46. David says, be still and know that I am God, that I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. And so, again, we kill ourselves because we want to exalt ourselves, not exalt God. We kill ourselves. This is one reason we work too much. Well, I have to provide. I have to take care of that. I can't give that away to somebody else because they're not going to do it as well as I can. I'm the one who has to organize that. Do you remember the last time that she organized a birthday party? Do you remember how it went? I'm the one who has to organize that. I have to take care of that. No, this is a meeting that I need to be in. I need to be there for those people. And so we exalt ourselves. And David says one of the reasons that we struggle so much in life is because we're exalting the wrong person. We're exalting ourselves instead of God. Here's something else that, as we have learned about resting, as we have learned about letting go, is that whenever we rest, we're affirming that God is in control and that we are not. That every time we stop, every time we pull back. Now, here's some fears about pulling back for Katie and I, as we talked about. What are our friends going to think if we don't hang out with them as much? What's going to happen if we don't sign up for that t-ball team again? Will our kids miss out on a scholarship if they don't start playing sports by the time they're 3.5? This is a real fear that parents have. If I don't sign my kids up for equestrian and, this other thing and student government, and they need to have about 15,000 extracurricular activities just to be considered for an application for a scholarship, this is how we think as parents. And so we push and we push and we push. And the other thing too, instead of exalting God, a lot of times we just put God into other people. I was talking with a woman recently, and she said, what do I do? All of my family lives where we do. And so we always have these parties and birthday parties, and I feel this expectation to go. And I said, well, what would happen if you didn't go? She said, well, I'm just afraid they're all going to be bad. And I said, well, what happened if you got deathly sick? And you could not get out of bed? She said, well, then I wouldn't go. And I said, what would they do? And I said, in the same way, this is how people react. I said, let it go. She looked at me and she said, I don't know that I can. And the sad thing is, whenever we make this choice, whenever we say yes and no to the wrong things, we miss out on the life that God has for us. They read it from Matthew earlier, and I love what Matthew 11 says. And I want to read it from the Message version. It says, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? I don't know if you can relate to those at all. Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life, Jesus says. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn, I love this phrase, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Now, I'm a planner. This is why this phrase speaks to me so highly. I am a planner. I'm a control freak. I call it a planner. Being with Ty is challenging me. But things in my life are not unforced. I force and plan everything. I know what I'm going to miss. I put into my calendar every little detail of my life. I am just off the charts like that. And so when Jesus says, come to me and learn the unforced rhythms of grace, in that moment, there's a little twitch that begins to happen. But there's a longing in my heart that begins to happen where I think, man, it'd be great to just the unforced rhythms of grace to walk with me. Jesus says, I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. So the first reason that we end up living without breathing room is because we try to be God. But the second reason is that we carry burdens that we aren't meant to carry. We carry burdens that we aren't meant to carry. That person and that relationship that you're trying to change, that's not your job. That boss that you're trying to fix, that's not your job. That spouse that you're trying to change, and as you read marriage books and you highlight it and you like dog ear the page and put it under the remote so that he'll see it, it is not your job to change him and carry that burden. That silent treatment that you give people to get your way, that's not your job or burden to do. We carry burdens that we are not meant to carry. We carry pressures that we aren't meant to carry. So here's a couple of things that we've learned as a family, as a church, that just as we've tried to live into these unforced rhythms of grace that Jesus invites us into. And the first one is, it sounds very simple, but it's to admit that you need breathing room. That night when Katie and I left the movie theater and we went out to eat together, and we're sitting there, we live in Tucson, so we're sitting there eating chips and salsa, and we're sitting there in silence, and we just sat there for it felt about 10 minutes. And finally she broke the silence and said, Josh, what's going on right now? And I feel like she braced herself for just the worst. And I looked at her and I said, I have no idea, but I'm not sure, because the next day we had church and I was going to preach. And I said, I'm not sure that I can even get out of bed tomorrow to do my job. I'm not sure. It feels so overwhelming right now, everything that we have to do and everything that's going on. And I'm not really sure that I can move forward with it. And I don't even know that I want to. And so that first step of saying, I'm stuck in this place. And we brought the leaders in our church into it. We brought our family into it and said, hey, we're going to pull back from things. We're going to stop saying yes to everything. We're going to stop being at everything. And we're going to turn our phones off. And if you die, then you can call us tomorrow, because you'll still be dead. But to admit that you need breathing room. See, this is living out these verses. When you say that you need breathing room, what you're saying to Jesus is, Jesus, I am carrying the burden that you are supposed to carry. I'm carrying something that I shouldn't. The second thing is very simple, is that if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. If you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. Have you ever sat in a meeting and thought, you know what, I don't need to be here. I don't need to be at this meeting. Like, this meeting doesn't even need to exist. This could have been an email. Ever been there? Going to your school, something at your child's school, and you think, you know what, they just should have done this. Why? I don't even know. In that moment, we have allowed somebody else to prioritize our life. Third thing, give everything a minute. Everything that's important in your life has a minute attached to it. Give everything a minute. So for me, I'm a huge Steelers fan. So the moment that the Steelers schedule comes out, I put all their games into my phone. So that way I know. So if you ask me on November 22nd, hey, can we hang out at 3 o'clock? I'll look at my phone and go, nope. I have a date with my Steelers. I cannot hang out with you at 3 o'clock. Now, I get pushback on this all the time, but this is true. So if you want to push back on me, we'll hang out at the table together and you can push back at me on this. Here's one of the truths. You have all the time you need to accomplish everything you want to accomplish. Now, notice I didn't say everything you need to accomplish, but everything you want to accomplish. I mean, think about, do you know what is your most productive day of the year? Do you know what day that is? It's the day before you go on vacation. Now, you make a list. If you're a list person, you make a list. If you're not a list person, you just kind of like make it up as you go along. But at the end of that day before you're going on vacation and you've sent all your emails and you've changed everything and you've run to the store, and if you look at your list and go, I got about 8 things to do you know what happens? You just go, well, that's just going to have to wait till I get back because I'm leaving tomorrow, and you leave. But we don't live the rest of our days like that. And yet that is our most productive day. At the end of our day, and we look at our list and say, man, my to-do list is a mile long. How am I ever going to get this done? I have to call this person. So we sit at our computer and we rush through things and we keep going and going and going. Everything is important, has a minute. The fourth thing, when it comes to resting, to have 24 hours where you rest. Now, so we have 5 kids, 10 to 3. Resting for us comes in about 30-second increments at moments. But to have times where you are not focused on your email and social media, where you're not pulling electronics out, where you are turning the TV off and you're resting, you're taking a nap, you're going outside to enjoy creation. When it comes to resting, here's one of the things that I think we get so messed up on, because we struggle to think, well, what does rest look like? Resting for a follower of Jesus is enjoying God and enjoying what God has created you to do and the things that you love to do, the things that are recharging. And so if you love, to paint, to be artistic, to be creative, that's a way that you recharge. That's a way that you recharge in that. If it's being around people and having people over, that's a way that you recharge. If it's being an introvert and being by yourself, that's a way that you recharge, to think through, how is it that I recharge and enjoy God? See, and here's another just real practical thing when it comes to social media. Did you know that you are 3 times more miserable after checking Facebook and Instagram than before? Did you know this is a scientific medical fact? 3 times more miserable. Do you know why? I had no idea before Facebook that all of my friends have so much fun without me. I had no idea that they had events I didn't get invited to. They had dinners that they did without me. I had no idea too that all of my friends are amazing chefs. All of them. All of them. And their kids are 1,000 times cuter than mine. All of them. We are 3 times more miserable after turning on social media because of the comparison trap. And in that moment, do you know what we do in that moment? We put a burden on ourselves. Well, my husband's not like that. She got a date night. She got to go out. I'm stuck here eating mac and cheese off a high chair. Right? I've said before that every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. Every time you say yes to resting, every time you say yes to letting something go and saying, I'm not going to be angry anymore about that. I'm just going to let it go. I'm just going to let that be. Every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. Every time you say, God, you're going to have to take control of this. You're going to have to do what only you can do. And I'm going to stop working right now, and I'm going to stop checking this, and it's just not going to matter. And if the office burns down, then it just burns down, and we'll cheer, and we'll not work tomorrow. But every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. So here's a couple of questions for you. What area of your life right now are you trying to be God? What relationship in your life right now are you trying to be God in? Are you trying to change? Is there something that you're pushing and trying to make your kids have a certain grade point average and trying to make them move in this certain direction? What area of your life are you trying to be God? The second one, what burdens do you need to let go of? See, one of the things that keeps so many people from breathing room and pushes us to have a perfect life or push us to be workaholics has a lot to do with the last song that we sang, that we struggle with this image of a father. I have talked to countless men who said, I have never had a dad who told me, I'm proud of you. I've talked to countless women who have said, I never had my father say, you're worthwhile. And when you push everything away, when you try to see why it is that you're trying to be God and why it is that you can't stop and why it is that you can't be alone and why it is that you're afraid of the silence, it often goes back to, when you push all of that away, it often goes back to that you are carrying a burden you're not meant to carry, and that burden is, I'm trying to impress somebody that I'll never impress. And Jesus says, if you come to me, I'll never lay anything ill-fitting on you. You'll learn to rest. You'll learn to walk with me. You'll learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And that's so beautiful for those of us who grew up in a forced family where we felt like we had to perform, where we felt like we had to be perfect. Let's pray. Father, I thank you. I thank you that you do not put anything ill-fitting on us. And I pray right now for the burdens that we carry, the people that we're trying to change, the things that keep us awake at night, the things we're worried about, our kids and finances and career and health. Those burdens that we carry that really you are supposed to carry. Those things that we can't control, but because you're God, you can control. And you do control. And so I pray that we, as your kids, as your followers, that we would live into the unforced rhythms of grace. I pray for those who maybe are just skeptical about you. I think, is God really that good? Is Jesus really going to take my burden? I pray that for those who are struggling in that place over this next week, pray, Holy Spirit, that you would just show them that, yes, you are that good. And yes, you do take that burden. And for those of us who you are taking to the end of our rope so that we'll see we can't do it. I thank you for that night 4.5 years ago when you opened my eyes to say, Josh, you are just carrying things you shouldn't carry. In your name, amen. Well, we're going to close by celebrating communion together. And communion is this amazing time as a follower of Jesus because it's a reminder of what Jesus has done. But it's also this reminder for us of what our hope is in. Because when we rest, when we stop trying to be God, when we stop trying to carry burdens we aren't meant to carry, we are placing our hope in something besides ourselves. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, as we spend these next few moments just remembering that, to celebrate that, and maybe for you, maybe you need to confess some areas where you're trying to be God, where you're pushing, and you're saying yes to the wrong stuff, and you're saying no to the wrong stuff, and you just need to confess that and say, Jesus, this is where I'm falling short. And I want to live in the unforced rhythms of grace that you have for me. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, then we would just encourage you to pass the plate on by, to spend these next few moments searching your heart to see, is Jesus really who he says he is? What would it look like for me to stop living into the forced rhythms of my own life and to live into the unforced rhythms of Jesus' grace?